State Board work session will now come to order. Denise, please call roll.
Deborah Neary. Here. Patsy Ko-Johns.
Here.
Lisa Fricke.
Here.
Maureen Nichols.
Here.
Rachel Wise.
Present.
Robin Stevens.
Here.
Patricia Tim.
Yes.
John Witzel.
Here.
Commissioner Bloomstead.
Present.
All present.
Thank you, Denise. Information regarding the Open Meetings Act is posted on the east wall of this room on the south side of the door. Live web streaming will be available through the State Board of Education website. Board members, please engage your microphones before speaking and turn them off when you are done speaking. And please turn off your cell phones at this time. Thank you. Move on to Commissioner's Report and Agenda Overview. Consent Agenda, Commissioner Bloomstead.
Yeah, just as routine, if you have any items you'd like to have further discussion with staff about or would like to remove an item for separate vote from the consent agenda, please just fill out that form and give it to Scott or put it in that box, I guess, in front of Scott if that's there. And then report on rules will be really quick. I just have, it's in your materials, but the rules update memo that's in there. We have Rule 11 that's been approved by the Attorney General's office, and then also Rule 46 and Rule 53, both so far approved by the Attorney General's office. So all three of those are awaiting governor's response on those. So.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Next, we'll go into board priorities, discuss student voice opportunities for State Board of Education. Dr. Four.
I've got a couple other items too, if I can, that fall under policy research. For many years, the state board has presented a session at the Nebraska Association of School Boards, the State Education Conference in cooperation too with the NCSA. And you'll know, or maybe you don't, that it's downtown Omaha this year, moved to a bigger venue at the CHI Center downtown. And the state board has a session there on Thursday, November 21st from 2:15 to 3:15. And so as we've done, we'll work with President Witzel to design an engagement session during that time. We did put in for a couple different opportunities and we're given that one opportunity. And so we'll work with the President and get engagement from each of you or input from each of you on how best to engage folks attending that session. Just a note on tomorrow's agenda, there's an opportunity in the afternoon for a discussion on the State Leadership Playbook, which was introduced a few months ago. And I think because much of the focus of that playbook is on engagement, that'll be a great opportunity too to talk about your proposed town hall meetings in your respective districts. And so look for that tomorrow towards the end of the Friday agenda. The topic that's on the agenda for right now then is student voice. And I've shared this with you before, and perhaps you've seen this document from NASB, and I'll pass around some copies of this and put it in front of you again in case it's not familiar today. So there's been quite a bit of discussion nationally among state boards of education about student voice in state education governance. This was a big topic at the NASB conference, and so when I say NASB this time, I'm talking about National Association of State Boards of Education, right? The organization to which this board is a member of. At the conference last year, and then the conference this year in Omaha, student voice was also a topic. And I know that some of you were interested in that, asked for that to be on the agenda. And so this is the space for that discussion. And so I'm anchoring that with the information that we've provided before about what's happening in other places. And so President Witzel, I gather that some board members might have some thoughts around this topic.
Yes. Patsy.
Well, you know, I always liked Nebraska to be number one in everything, right? And so while we were at that meeting, I believe the statistic was that 35 other states were in the process or already had adopted a student voice into their state board. And so I started visiting with as many people. You know, that was pretty difficult for me as well. But I started visiting with people throughout the meeting to find out just exactly what are the kinds of things that they are doing. And I'd also visited with you, Ryan, about some ideas that you had. I'm not particularly at this point sold on any one idea. I was just gathering information. But I do believe that to be true to our mission statement and to be true to our equity statement, we should have student voice in the Nebraska State School Board. And I would like us not to be the 50th state to do that. So I brought it forward. I spoke to John about it, not because I thought what we had to do had to happen today or tomorrow. It's something I want us to work on, start working on. So whether we decide, like one gentleman I visited with, they had so many school districts and they took applications from around the state, and then they limited it to that number of school districts plus 2. And they interviewed the students, and they chose 2 students to be part of the board, a junior and a senior. And then they took each one of those students from their districts and made them part of a panel. And the panel was an advisory panel. And then the 2 students came into the meeting. I also listened to problems that were presented about having student representatives. One of them was travel and making sure that that was safe, and making sure that students were mentored when they did get to the state board meeting, that it wasn't just that they sat there and listened to things that they didn't understand or they felt like they didn't have a part of. And I think that goes also right along with what we're doing and trying to be better at in our social studies standards, civic engagement, and I think a lot of people in this state would see that as a step forward as far as getting students involved in our government. So I think that would be another reason that we might want to look at it. As I said, the format, each person I talked to, I thought, oh, well, that's a good idea, that's a good idea, that's a good idea. Until when I finally sat down at the end of the day, I thought, well, we need a Nebraska idea, a good Nebraska idea. I'd like to see the students of Nebraska want to be a part of this and feel like they were doing something really wonderful for the state and expressing the students' opinions. So as we look at the ideas, and I hope we do it really soon, we don't procrastinate on it, I want us to keep the students in that focus and how they can contribute the most to you, Commissioner, and to us as state board members, and to their fellow students throughout the state.
Patsy. Lisa.
That's okay. Our new NASB meeting in Washington, D.C. is where Patsy and I found out about many states that had a single person on the board, and we both thought, what a wonderful idea. Things to consider is that we're a constitutional body, and so if we're going to have one person, then there's a constitutional change there, and so that's one aspect. The advisory idea, I think, is also, either way we go, I support whatever we decide on, but if we go with the advisory, I would look forward to having representatives from each district, and then each of us on the board could be a mentor and meet with the person in our own district. So lots of awesome things that Patsy had to say and options, so just things to think about.
Patsy.
Correct me if I'm wrong, it's not having the student on the board that's a constitutional change. but it would change the Constitution if we had them vote. Is that correct, Ryan?
I'm going to defer to others.
Well, first of all, you couldn't have them as a member of the board, so it would be advisory. And I would use it as an example. I'm on the state college's board of trustees. And so we have student members for that, and they sit with the board and actually are in committee meetings and other things. So I think, yeah, it would take a constitutional change to actually make that a voting member. And other things that are constitutional responsibilities of the board obviously would have to be adjusted for.
Yeah, Rachel.
Yeah, and I think it's a really important area that we pursue. And I think doing the research in whichever committee it lands on to look at some different models, because there are different models for different states, and looking at a model that works well. And I think once a committee determines and makes some recommendation based on research and input and brings it forward, I think there's a lot of interest in the board of doing something to increase student voice in whatever manner a committee wants to bring something forward. I do know it may be important to consider it from a policy perspective and how it comes into play at a policy committee, but certainly from a student success and access, it's about student voice. It fits in so I just think it's important that we move it towards a committee, get some specific action steps defined, and I concur with my colleagues sooner rather than later, and then move forward with it.
Commissioner, I'd like to, Dr. Ford, let's form an ad hoc committee on this. Let's get going on it immediately.
Would it be your preference to assign it to the Student Success and Access Committee or a separate
Let's say
committee?
ad hoc.
That creates another committee.
Yeah, but it's temporary, just for this purpose. We'll talk about it. Lisa?
So the ad hoc committee would have representatives from the different committees
Sure.
potentially on that, so you're getting different voices
Correct.
from not just one committee, but a variety.
Correct.
And it could be telephone calls, it could be.
Yes.
Yeah, I kind of like that.
So I believe, anyway, and we'll double check policy, but I believe the president
I
has the
have the-
ability to
I
assign
do.
an ad hoc
Yes.
committee, so that'd be fine.
Good. Yes, ma'am.
I think that would be a very good idea to start with, and here's why. When you first said it, I thought, well, we'd just be duplicating work. But I think the idea of getting a person from each one of the committees in there to give
Absolutely.
their ideas is a very good idea, John.
We'll move forward with it, Patsy.
Okay.
Thank you very much for bringing it forward, and then we'll form that committee.
Can I offer just a little bit more information from this handout to think about in the meantime?
Please, sir.
So, as you may recall, about 75% of the state boards around the country are appointed by the governor. 25% are elected, of which Nebraska falls in. And of the states that are most similar to Nebraska in structure of an elected state board that also appoints the state school officer, in our case, the commissioner, Utah, Colorado, Alabama, and the Northern Mariana Islands are the most similar to Nebraska. And so as you look at this map, you'll see that Utah, which from my research is the most similar of all of the states and territories to Nebraska, Utah has a state student advisory council. So again, keeping in mind that's an elected board that appoints the state school officer. Alabama is also elected, and they appoint the state school officer, and they have a student advisory council. At the press of this document from NASB last December, Colorado did not have anything indicated, and I don't know that they do. And then the Northern Mariana Islands, you'll see, has a non-voting student member. So I point those out as your peers. I would also point to North Dakota, which is not reflected here. North Dakota has, and they have an elected state school official, but North Dakota has what I would call a robust student advisory panel with a number of student representatives from around the state, and that's one that Dr. Freisen came across in her interaction with Kirsten Basler, who's the state school superintendent in North Dakota. And so we've started to look at some of those different structures to think about how that operates in different states.
Thank you, Dr. Ford. Thank you very much, sir. Oh, go ahead, Lou.
I have a quick question, Brian. This goes back to the conference coming up in Omaha. That's 2:15 to 3:15 on Thursday?
Correct.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify, it was Thursday, not Friday.
So for the world listening out there, come interact with the state board on Thursday, November 21st at 2:15.
Thank you, sir. At this time, 2019 Nebraska Teacher of the Year, Sydney Jensen, a ninth grade English teacher from Lincoln High School in Lincoln, will come forward and give us a presentation on her year in review. Sydney?
Hello, everybody. How y'all doing?
Good.
Good to see y'all. All right. It has been a whirlwind of a year. I can't believe that I'm already back, basically saying, see you later. Because it's not goodbye. I hope I'll still be able to get with you guys and be involved. So first of all, we're off to another great school year over at Lincoln High. I was telling some of y'all a few minutes ago down at the luncheon celebrating our 2020 Teacher of the Year. I feel like I end up with the best kids in the world every single year. I don't know how they find them and put them all in my class, but they sure do manage. And so things are going really well in that aspect of things. I also just returned from our Next Steps conference in Princeton, New Jersey. So as a 2019 State Teacher of the Year cohort, we reconnected there at the ETS campus to talk about what our next steps are and what sort of ways we're hoping to continue to grow as individuals, as educators, and as a group. Challenging ourselves to think about what we hope will come next in our journey and how we can take all of the learning that we've gathered over the course of our time together this year and share it with our colleagues. One of the ways that I had the opportunity to do that is I recorded a TED Talk at the TED headquarters in New York City. Last week, I found out that they are going to publish it on TED.com, which is really exciting. That all really started back in February when we first convened as a group at the Google campus in California. Someone came in to lead a storytelling session with us. They gave us 10 minutes to go off and write a story about something from our classroom, and then they invited people to volunteer to share their story out loud. I raised my hand, and in my head I thought they're either calling on me first or I'm not getting up at all, because I already knew that I was surrounded by so many amazing teachers and I didn't want to have to follow anyone else. Thankfully, I was called on first. And so I shared my story. I didn't realize that representatives from TED were actually in the room at the time and heard it. They approached me after the session was over and told me they had already sent me an email and they wanted me to go forward with filling out a proposal for a TED Talk. When I was thinking about it the week before flying out to deliver it, I thought to myself, man, I don't know if I've worked harder on anything else in my whole entire life. It was about 200 hours of work for about 10 minutes of a TED Talk. So I'm excited, but I'm also very nervous about it hitting the internet next week. So that'll be at 3 o'clock, Wednesday, November 13th. The URL is on this slide. It's going to be on TED.com/Sydney Jensen. They sent me that, and I was like, hey, that's me. So I'm very excited about that. My talk focuses on something that is really important to me, and I think it's important to a lot of teachers across Nebraska and across the country. The focus of the talk is on secondary trauma and compassion fatigue, and how it is truly an epidemic that teachers across our state and our country are facing as we work with students who come from chaos in the home or traumatic events in their past, and how we have to be providing mental wellness supports to our teachers so that they can be that mental support and emotional support for their students. So I'm eager for it to come out. I've told everybody I totally blacked out on stage, so I'm excited to hear it too. With the NASB conference coming to Omaha, that also brought one of my close friends from our 2019 cohort, our National Teacher of the Year, Mr. Rodney Robinson. And so it's another reason I'm so thankful for this experience, is that friendship that I've developed with him. So I had the chance to take him out to supper the night before and then go and hear him speak at the conference. We're hoping to get him back in Nebraska for another keynote here pretty soon. So I made some promises that I would send him some text messages and also see if I could get to him through his wife. So we'll work on that. Last week, I had the chance to present a breakout session at the 2019 Read Aloud Nebraska workshop held in Seward, Nebraska. I had never been to Seward until this, and now I can't wait to go back. It is just such a cute little town. I was able to present at the public library and talk about myself. Though I'm an English teacher, I considered myself very much a resistant reader. I've referred to myself before as a victim of popcorn reading in elementary school. And so being able to talk about my journey to loving books and all of the different twists and turns that it took was really fun to be able to talk to those other educators and media specialists from across our state. And we had some really rich conversations about ways that we can use books in our classrooms to build relationships with our students and to encourage that lifelong love of reading, reading for enjoyment, not just for academia. So in my classroom, sometimes I use what I call a 3-2-1 for my students to summarize their learning. So I assigned one to myself. The 3 in a 3-2-1, you write down 3 major takeaways from what you've learned. So 3 things that I've learned this year. The State Teacher of the Year program has emphasized in me the need for teachers to be able to share our stories from our classrooms. Our profession is stronger with the voices of many. All of our kids are different, they're individuals, and each class is totally different from period to period, day to day, year to year. And so the more that we're hearing from teachers in our more rural districts as well as in our metro districts, the better we're going to be able to serve our students from across the state. The second thing is, as teachers, we must continue to learn and grow. If we stop learning, so will our students. This year reinforced this belief in me and reminded me that failure leads to success, especially at Space Camp, where they asked me to do quite a lot of math as an English teacher. The last thing is that relationships are the heart of what we do every day. Education is about our kids, and as long as we remember who we are and who we're for, then we'll be doing the right thing. So after 3 major takeaways, there's 2 questions. What can we do to continue to grow the Nebraska Teacher of the Year program? One of the things that I've been working on is just building that social media presence. And so I created a Nebraska Teacher of the Year Facebook page that I'm now passing on to our 2020 Teacher of the Year. The hope is that more and more teachers across the state will start to follow that social media page. It'll continue to shine a spotlight on not just Teachers of the Year, but all the great teachers across our state, and continue to just lift up that message of the great things that we're doing here in Nebraska. People are following it from all across the country at this point, and so I'm excited to watch that keep growing under Megan's careful watch. The next one is, how can I continue to use my voice to serve the students and teachers of Nebraska? One of those things is I really love to write, and so I'm excited now that I'll have a little bit more free time on my hands to be able to write for things like The Voice with NSCA, to write for other national organizations. I wrote one article for ASCD earlier this year. I'm excited to continue to follow that pathway and use that passion that I have as well. And the last one is one opinion. Nebraska has some of the finest educators and educational leaders in the country, and I've learned that we are just so blessed to have all of the resources that we have, to have all of the great minds coming together in support of our students. And I'm just so thankful that I've been able to step into one of those leadership positions. I hope I've represented the state well. I know that I filled very big shoes from those who came before me, and I'm just so thankful to have gotten to know y'all as members of the state board. And so another practice in my classroom is gratitude. Every single day we build in something where we get to thank the people around us who have helped us to learn and grow in that lesson. And so thank you for the opportunity to make 57 new teacher friends. They have truly become my family, and I'm so grateful to know them and to call them my friends. And thank y'all for your support, guidance, care, supper invitations, conversations, handshakes and hugs over the last year. I hope that we'll continue to be able to grow in those relationships. I know that I'd sure miss you if I didn't get to see you again, so I'm excited to continue to connect with y'all and talk about all the great things that teachers in our state are up to and how wonderful our kids are. But with that, congratulations to Megan Hellberg, our 2020 Nebraska Teacher of the Year. She, I'm sure, is going to serve us well, and I'm so excited to watch her start off on this journey, too. So thank y'all.
Thank you, Sydney. Thank you, Sydney. Now we'd like to invite the 2020 Nebraska Teacher of the Year, Megan Hellberg, an 8th, 11th, and 12th grade English teacher from Brewell Senior High School in Brewell, to come forward and tell us a little bit about herself and what you are looking forward to this year. Megan, please come forward, ma'am.
Hello. Yes. As he said, my name is Megan Hellberg. I am from Taylor, Nebraska. I live on a ranch there north of Taylor. I teach in Burwell, Nebraska. This is my 10th year of teaching. I teach English, and I'm also the head volleyball coach. So I said today's kind of a little bittersweet because I was hoping that I'd have to run off to state volleyball, but we lost in sub-districts. It probably ended up for the better, so I didn't have to rush off. But I am incredibly humbled. I think especially after today and being at the luncheon and being surrounded by so many wonderful people involved with education, it's finally starting to hit me a little bit more about what's going to come with this next year. And I'm fully ready to embrace the experience, go and learn as much as I can, and bring that back to not only my school, but my community. I'm very passionate about how small rural schools, it's not just about the school, but it's what keeps the community going, that the school is the heartbeat of the community. So it really is a full community effort, and I hope to bring that back to students and community members. Is there anything else I should?
Well,
I could go on and on
We
and on.
have 3 hours of questions for you.
Yes. But no, I'm just very thankful for the opportunity, and I'm very thankful for those who've come before me. Sydney has been really wonderful about helping me just kind of understand what's going to be coming my way. And I'm looking forward to getting to know all of you more. I'm looking forward to being here and keeping you up to date with my journey as it continues.
thank you, Megan.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Megan. We look forward to your quarterly updates at our meetings throughout the year of 2020 Nebraska Teacher of the Year. And at this time, we will take a 10-minute break. Report on the Strategic Planning, Performance, and Improvement Committee meeting, please.
Yes, and I'm going to just skip down and start our item with 3.7.B, which is a discussion item for this month, and it's to discuss the evaluation and revision of the Community Achievement Plan, CAP, of the learning community of Douglas and Sarpy counties. This will be coming back to us next month for action, but this month it is here for discussion, and we have a team here. So I'm really turning it over to the team, and I'm gonna turn it over probably to Shirley first. Shirley Varga with the department, who will be introducing the team and our discussion item.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Sorry now we have to get into actual work and not hear about the Teachers of the Year anymore, but this will be great. I have a huge team with me, as you can see. I'm going to call up Dave Patton, who's the CEO of the Learning Community, and Mark Feldhauser, who's a consultant working with the Learning Community, to come join me, and then I'll also talk about the rest of the members who we have here. Susan Kelly is the chair of the Learning Community. I have Nicole Seymour, who oversees the Goals Center. That's one of the parts of the learning community and part of the Community Achievement Plan. And we have Kim Bodensteiner, who is part of the Buffett Early Childhood Institute. So really quickly, one of the documents that we presented, that we uploaded onto Spark, is just really quickly, it's the entire revised plan, but I want to just provide you a really quick overview of where we were and to how we got where we are today. The Community Achievement Plan that is currently in effect was approved by the State Board in April of 2017. The Learning Community came in November of 2018 to present a report as to the progress that has been made. And the Community Achievement Plan is a component of the Learning Community of Douglas and Sarpy County. It's made up of 4 areas, or 4 sections rather. Those 4 sections are increased access to early childhood programming, the superintendent's plan to improve attendance, specifically the Goals Center, which we'll get into in a moment as well, the increased parent engagement and system capacity building through the North and South Omaha Learning Centers, and then lastly, the Metropolitan Omaha Education Consortium, a MOAC Collective Impact Achievement Plan. So I just want to remind you that today is a discussion item, like Rachel Wise has mentioned, and next month we'll bring it again in front of the board for approval. I'm going to turn it over to Dave Patton and Mark to then go into more detail as to the documents you have in front of you, and then we can go from there.
All right, thanks. I'm going to point out one other person who's here with us, which is the superintendent of Ralston
I'm
Public
so
Schools.
sorry.
Mark Adler, so he's one of the
Yes, thank
11
you, Dr. Adler.
superintendents
Yes,
at
thank
the
you.
learning community, so.
Yes, thank you.
So yes, in your package, well, before we get into that, let's talk a little history of the Community Achievement Plan. So the Community Achievement Plan was legislatively created back in 2015. It is a 3-year cycle. The purpose of the Community Achievement Plan was to ensure that the 11 school districts of the Omaha metro area continue to collaborate, to work towards equity, and to narrow the achievement gap of students and families. So that was the purpose that it was created. We came to you at that first cycle, presented to you a plan that comprised of, like Dr. Vargas said, congratulations, Dr. Vargas, on that, by the way, the 4 components that she talked about. So the centers of the learning community, both in North and South Omaha, superintendent's plan to improve attendance, goals, and the superintendent's plan for early childhood. And then the MOAC, Metro Omaha Education Consortium's collective impact plan, was something new. They had begun work on that when I joined the Learning Committee, which was the first year of the Community Achievement Plan. They had begun some of that work. Mark was facilitating that at the time, and we continued to put that together. So with that being said, when you look at this document that was provided to you, this is the evaluation of that first cycle. So the data that's contained in here is all data from that period up until the most recent evaluation that was provided. And so let me clarify that. In the month of November is when the Learning Community Coordinating Council will receive the new evaluation for the data that completed this previous school year. That is not in here because that evaluation was not done yet. The evaluation for goals was not done yet. That's being presented in November as well. the evaluation for the superintendent's plan. The new evaluation is down in here. So all of the data that's in here is in that time frame from 2015 to 2018. Then 2019, the year we're in, those evaluations are beginning to be compiled and released as we speak. So those will be new in November, okay? So it's very timely. The data in here is timely. So I will let you review that, and if you have any questions, let us know. That's what, only about 52 pages long, so, as an evaluation. With that being said, we have taken the time as a working group, and everybody that was introduced to you as a part of that working group. And so I'll point out again that we have elected officials that are a part of our working group as well. Our chair and our vice chair are on that group. The superintendents of the metro area approved the working group, and we have been working on that to update, to align to many of the goals and the activities that the State Board and the Department of Ed have looked at, but also to try to represent the magnitude of the partnerships that we all enjoy within the Omaha metro area. I do not believe it's an inclusive list. It would be difficult to find a fully inclusive list. When I looked at just the ones of the partnerships of the learning community, which are over 50, I thought, oh, I think we forgot a couple. So it's just really difficult sometimes to capture it all. But that's going to be enough of my introduction, because I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Feldhausen to let him draw your attention to the key points that have been changed and updated. So,
thank you, David. Good afternoon, everyone. You have 3 documents, and to make sure everybody understands which one is which, we have a 13-page executive summary of the report. This document has a nice color, fancy cover. It's put together by Dave and his team. It's been loaded up to Sparks as a PDF. There is also the Community Achievement Plan evaluation that he was referring to. I would also note that this document is based upon the independent work of researchers at Monroe Meyer Institute who are connected with UNMC, as well as evaluators who are connected with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. We believe that that independent third party or set of third party individuals is very important, because they look at this they look at everything that we've done with a very critical eye. And this report is reflective then of the not just the last 2.5 years, but even time before that, and is presented in a quantitative and qualitative manner. Not everybody appreciates quantitative information. And what we've done is we've also tried to translate that into a pictogram, which is shown in the executive summary, which simply identifies progress by virtue of a check mark for the year in question and that particular goal or part of the plan. And so if you were to take a look, Dave is providing a visual representation here, but page 3 and 4 of the executive summary shows the check marks. The check mark in this case is indicative of the fact that for that particular area, the results have been both statistically significant as well as showing growth, and quantitative in nature. Qualitative results are also shown and are indicated by the legend as well. I'm not going to get into it in great detail other than referencing things in the larger report here. In looking at the larger report, I know one of the focuses was, well, what's changed since we were last here? And if I could direct your attention in the larger report to page 14, that's a summary of the changes that we'd like to talk about. Prior to that list of changes, however, if you were to take a look at the matrix that precludes that page, that's a matrix that shows the correlation between the various components of the Community Achievement Plan, whether it be the early childhood component, the issue of attendance, the North and South Omaha Learning Centers, as well as parent engagement from the learning community, and then the MOAC Collective Impact Plan. We've attempted to take and correlate that with AQuESTT components and show the alignment or the connections between what the CAP is doing, as well as what is most important to you as a State Board of Education relative to your strategic initiatives and vision for the future. And so the matrix does, I think, a credible job of showing the relationship between what your goals are and how that is being represented by the Community Achievement Plan. As I told the group earlier today, the committee, the first iteration of that matrix from 2 years ago was much more detailed and probably looked like there was more alignment between the CAP and the goals of the State Board of Education, because one of the things that has happened in the last 2 years is you've become much more focused. You have streamlined your strategic plan, your vision and direction for the future. And so our alignment has taken that into consideration, shows that where we are still matching up with your ongoing focus, but I assure you that as you continue to adjust your vision, adjust your plan of action for the future, I believe that the CAP will continue to be able to show a credible alignment with that. Because the four components of the CAP really cover a wide variety of educational interests and educational issues that are at the heart of your strategic vision for the future. Continuing on then with regard to page 14 and the items that are listed there, as well as the matrix that shows that alignment, each CAP section has an equity statement provided. That equity statement is drawn directly from the equity playbook that was released in August, and is a similar statement for each one of the CAP sections. It's similar in nature because with that playbook having just been released, school districts are appropriately engaged in conversations as to how equity might be facilitated and might be demonstrated within each of their districts and within the plan per se. So we've not provided necessarily any specifics at this point because those conversations are just getting started. The other thing that I would note, pardon me, is that the goals, the SMART goals that were a part of the original plan, are being continued. These goals have been extended beyond 2020, now to 2022. In some cases, as the evaluation would point out, some of those goals are, if not having been met, are certainly on their way to being met, but we believe those goals are sufficiently important as to necessitate their being extended out through 2022 as a part of the overall plan of action. The data and summary results that have been updated for sections 1 and section 3. That's specifically, again, the early childhood component as well as the learning community North and South Omaha sites. The data that was presented in the evaluation program really, I think, goes a long way in demonstrating exactly how student achievement for early childhood is being demonstrated and is being met, how parents are being engaged with, and how they are becoming better at the very act of parenting and understanding what school is all about in both North Omaha and South Omaha, and the list goes on. So that data and those summary results are all part of that. The goal strategies, goals being with regard to attendance, those are listed as new, in some cases, new initiatives, and certainly if you have specific questions about changes that might be taking place there, we'll get Nicole here to answer any questions for you. In section 4, the MOAC Collective Impact Plan, Dr. Bruckner, who's the executive director of MOAC, is unable to be with us today. But between Mark Adler or David or myself, we'll certainly try to address any questions you would have there. I would note that as we take a look at the MOAC Collective Impact Achievement Plan, the metrics have been updated, the goals themselves have been updated in the subsections therein, and baseline information has been collected. One of the questions that came up was in our morning session was within the report itself, the data that's being presented, the baseline data, we would point out that we've taken the baseline data and we've broken it up so that that data that is most reflective of college and career readiness and post-secondary information is in one location. Data that is reflective of student achievement is in another section. So for example, if we were to take a look at pages 52 through 54 in that report, you would find information there that is relative to student baseline information for student achievement. Similarly, on page 57, you would find information for baseline information for college and career readiness, post-secondary information. And some of the post-secondary information we would note it seems to be incongruent in terms of when it's being presented and the class that it may be referencing. We should note that the information is coming from a third party, external to any of our organizations. It's coming from actually the federal government. It takes multiple years for that information to be provided, so that as we look at this year, in the 1920 school year, we're just now getting information for the class of 17 in terms of they're going to college and how they're doing in college. And so although it appears to be a mismatch, it is appropriately correlated information at this point in time. Finally, as Dave alluded to, there is a list of partnerships that is contained at the end of each of the sections. I want to reiterate the fact that the CAP was created because of legislative concern about the collaboration and cooperation that existed in and amongst school districts on the one hand, but more equally importantly, what is happening within the community. How are school districts and educational organizations reaching out to, whether they be nonprofits or businesses, let alone in our case, K-12 versus post-secondary. What are they doing, and with whom are they working? And so the matrices at the end of each of those sections point out what's going on, who's involved, and I think shows a very robust level of collaboration and cooperation that's occurring within each of the CAP sections and the plans associated therein. And if you read the details of some of the initiatives that are taking place, you find things like the school districts within the Douglas-Sarpy County arena working with UNO, working with Metro Community College, working with Iowa Western Community College, because MOAC is an organization that crosses boundaries and includes the Council Bluffs School District as well as the Iowa Western for post-secondary purposes. So again, lots of cooperation, lots of collaboration, and we think this information is of value to you. Finally, I would point out that the original plan had a matrix of roles and responsibilities, which basically said, here's the plan of action for early childhood, or here's the plan of action in terms of student achievement, and what our goal is and whose responsibility for that. And it starts with the superintendent and goes down and includes principals and teachers and things of this nature. Very detailed. None of that has been removed from the plan. It's all still there. I took the liberty of not providing it a second time to you because nothing has changed. And if I had provided it, it would be a part of about a 350-page document, which we thought was a little much for this occasion. So I would summarize by simply saying that great progress has been made. Some of the components of the CAP are older than the 2.5 years that the CAP has been in existence. But at the same time, if I'm taking a look at something like early childhood, and I know Kim could probably speak to this better than I can, but if you're starting with a 3 and a 4-year-old, and you're saying ultimately, how are they doing by the time they get, how are they doing academically by the time they're in 3rd grade, some of our students that are a part of this program have not yet reached that point. And so 2.5 years in some people's minds is a long time, but in the world of education it's a very short period of time. And so lots of things yet to do, lots of data still to collect, and we hope to be able to do that and provide that for you in the future. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for the presentation this morning and today. I think there's a couple of things that I think would be beneficial for the group, because we have a homework assignment. And our homework assignment is to review the documents that you've provided, review, as you were doing, first the evaluation plan to get a better understanding there, to kind of use the executive summary as a catalyst to have orientation before we move into deeper learning and understanding of the actual plan, the 2018 to 2022 plan. And because our responsibility is a statutory responsibility in adopting this plan, there's really a responsibility that we have a good understanding of this plan. So taking the month to really read it and understand the plan is our responsibility in this process. But in doing so, what are a few things that you could share with us, especially for colleagues who maybe weren't here the last time around, that when you think about the activities you've identified and the goals that you've identified, what are a couple of things that you really want to highlight, that you want to just give some anecdotal information to, of things that you see happening, things that you see going on, that when we come back to read this can help make it continue to come alive in our thoughts and processes as we review all the information that you've provided. And maybe it's one of your others that's here that would like to provide a little bit of that anecdotal thought.
Mark had raised it. Yeah. I have thoughts, but.
I'll take a run at that. I appreciate it. I'm going to highlight two areas, and I think they might be in here just a little bit. The first one is some of the work, and so I'll probably talk more kind of about the collective impact. So when this all started, I'm so old that I was here before, and when we talked about it as superintendents, we didn't want to have another thing. We wanted it to be something that would live and we would work on all the time. And I guess I also want to preface the fact that we work together a lot on a lot of stuff in the metro area. The superintendents, I think our relationship and collaboration is, I don't know if it's as high as it's ever been, but we really do, I feel like we really do believe they're all of our kids all the time, whether they're Ralston kid, OPS, Miller, Westside, whatever it is. Two areas that I've been so proud of and fascinated about. First one is the work we're doing with math in the MOAC area. So there's a whole math work group that's in there. It's made up of high school math teachers from across the metro area. I think every high school has some math teachers in there, led by some folks at UNO, also at Metro. And what we found is when some of our kids would go to college, and probably more on the Metro side, they wouldn't perform very well at math, or they couldn't get in. They would have to take remedial math. And so then that sets everybody back. And so what they're trying to do is, and it's been working, we have two classes at Ralston High that we're doing, and the other high schools do as well. How can we bridge that gap so that our kids that are going to go there don't have to take remedial math, don't have to spend that extra time, that extra money, and these math people are energized like crazy because we're all talking math. How can we serve these kids better in all of our high schools, in some places with some high need, high diversity, and try to get our kids. If you look at scores, I think you're probably going to see math as one of the hardest ones for us to get across the finish line. And so I'm proud of that work. I think that's awesome. The other thing that we're dipping our toe in, it's just starting, is the MOAC group is doing some work with principal development. And so our leaders in our buildings are so powerful in the influence they can have. So, but we're really looking at, and I'm going to call it ninth grade academy. That might be the wrong word for it. But what we know is if a ninth grader's not on track for graduation by the time they finish ninth grade, their chances of getting across the finish line aren't very good. And so, and so we're going to work with the University of Chicago. We've got 4 dates coming up where we're going to send some of our principal teams to have some training and figure out how can we take the stuff they know, implement that in our schools so we can keep a close eye on, at our school, 60% of our kids live in poverty. And so if our ninth graders aren't on track by the time they're done with ninth grade, we better be ready to do something. So I'd like to intervene earlier. So that's 2 areas that I think are actionable. All the stuff that's in this plan is one thing, but that stuff that's happening that I'm excited about. So.
I'll jump in on a couple others. So, and I'll take liberties to speak for both goals and superintendent's plan, but please jump in. For the learning community, I think our two-generational approach, which is working with the children 0 to grade 3 and their parents, you'll see a lot of great information in there about that. We're very proud of where we're going with that. We still have a lot to learn. We very much believe in the continuing improvement process. So our data actually we look at multiple times throughout the year. It's not just a one-time piece for us. So that's unique in the education world, that we have begun to say, what are we doing outside of kindergarten? And what are we even doing outside of pre-K and with the families? So that piece. The superintendent's plan, the school is a hub, and the activities that they're doing there to bring families into the schools and really create that relationship with that family long before we never thought of, as a former superintendent, I didn't think of those children being mine until they came into kindergarten, maybe pre-K. And what the superintendent's plan is doing there, I think, is really impressive. And then goals, and Nicole Seymour is new to the goals. She brings a new, fresh set of eyes and an excitement to it and a new energy to it, and really looking at what efforts can be made to improve attendance with families that are struggling. What are those real barriers, and how can we manage those barriers and learn from those, and how can we learn from our program and continue to look forward? So I think every one of them, those are some of the key points that you'll see in there that are all very much aligned with the initiatives with this body that I would really bring your attention to. But the last thing I want to say is I was with one of the metro districts early on as well, and what Dr. Adler was saying, the collaboration and the discussions that are taking place now are exciting. We do sit around the table and we don't talk about, well, in my district or in my community or in my program. We talk about who are we working with, what are the community outreach programs that BECI does within the superintendent's plan to train daycare providers, the same programs that we do, we do similar programs. So we've begun to really look at education as a rounded approach. And we as a body, when we get together, Dr. Adler, those discussions are rich and informative and thoughtful.
I think, with the early childhood program, the superintendent's plan, BECI, so we're really investing in our young people before they even get to school, and so that is so important. There's a lot of work in MOAC that's happening with college and career readiness, FAFSA completion, but also, okay, now we have them in college, are they staying in college? But then just some of those markers along the way in math, literacy, just a lot of stuff there. So I feel like we're trying to look at the whole picture. The work with BCI has been incredible. I mean, we're a benefactor of that at our school, and we've been doing early childhood for a long time, but when we were able to partner with BECI, just the stuff that they do with Sam and the whole team is pretty awesome. So,
Yeah, for sure.
yeah.
If I might add, I have the privilege of sort of coming in and out of this process. And I call it a privilege because it really gives me a different view of what's taking place. And I guess I would say I'm sometimes astounded by the progress that's being made and the robustness of the process and the plans that are being presented. As Mark alluded to, the one in mathematics, which encompasses teachers, principals, as well as then what students are learning and how they're learning, is something that I think is most impressive. And the fact that it is not just K-12, but rather, or high school, but also has that post-secondary component. When I take a look at the plans as a whole, I really see this incredible picture of connected dots, because you have the early childhood component of BCI as a plan in and of itself, and yet there is a very robust component of early childhood within the collective impact plan of MOAC.
And within ours.
And within yours. There is attendance. It sits as an entity unto itself in terms of a section of the plan, and yet it is also contained within the MOAC plan.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll find this in every one of these plans. The connectedness between it and other plans is there so that it provides support and I think, again, emphasizes the robustness of the plan of action as it's spread across the two-county area. So that we can't say that, well, this plan belongs to simply this organization or set of individuals. It is really something that belongs to the entity as a whole. I find that very exciting, and something that as I come back into it every couple months, there's such a set of changes that have occurred. It's really a living entity unto itself.
Do you want me to read the question? Okay, I think Deborah.
Thank you all. And I just want to say to my peers here on the board, I've attended quite a few of your board meetings. I've seen the results, I've seen the data. It's so exciting what you're accomplishing in early childhood and attendance, and the parent university stories I've heard are amazing. So thank you for the amazing work that you do, and I want to give a shout out to Nicole, who's new, but she comes with a great reputation, and we're really excited about all that you're going to be able to do to focus on chronic absenteeism. So glad you're on the team too, but kudos to all of you, and thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you.
Lisa?
I echo what she said. It is truly amazing, and the collaboration, I just go back to the hearing when all the superintendents got up and in unison practically, we're on the same page for all schools and wanting to help students in poverty. My question is, it's a progress update, and I'm glad to see that you say you improved case management functions, and I just wanted to know how that's happening, because I'm sure there's some exciting, you said Nicole might be able to help address that. There she goes.
Dr. Adler. Hi, thank you so much for having me. So nice to meet all of you. When speaking about improving case management functions specifically, as I was onboarding, it was really important to me, an area of priority, to do a full program evaluation in regards to our family advocate services. So while doing that, I was able to identify areas where we could eliminate redundancies and create efficiencies, just frankly in workflow processes. And although those seem really small, when we're able to do that, the staff can actually spend more time in the community with the families doing that, field work that is critical to the success of the program. Some examples of those areas where we've updated or are working on updating internal and external forms, documentation standards, and what's actually should be documented and how we do that. We've refined and eliminated some internal duplicative tracking mechanisms, so we could maximize on those efficiencies, and we have developed more concise and simplified family-friendly documents. Additionally, the Goal Center currently uses the Ohio Scales as their evidence-based assessment tool, as a part of the program to create service plans for families. There is a space in a specific population that tool should be used for that brings value and a robust nature to the service planning. But those are highly student-driven plans, and that evaluation tool doesn't get at the heart of what the family issues are that are impacting the chronic absenteeism, which we know is a big contributing factor to a student's achievement. So due to that, we're actually adding a new family-driven evidence-based assessment tool to our milieu to identify areas of strength and needs in specific domains. And that will ensure that staff are creating clear family-centered goals based on the results of a tool rooted in that research and evidence. The intended outcome would ensure goals would make a broader, sustainable, and a more holistic impact for the long-term benefit of the entire family unit, not just the student. And addressing those areas of concern and building on those family strengths will assist the family in overcoming the main issues that impact that student attendance, hopefully for the long term. And we see siblings where we'll have several siblings in the household, but we're only serving one. So the hope is that we are doing some prevention work with those younger siblings as well when we do that.
Thank you. It's nice to hear that the inefficiencies are going away, so there's actual, personal time with the students and families and parents. So thank you. That's awesome.
Thank you.
I was trying to explain to my friend here that you work for MOAC, and, no, you don't. You do.
No, I work for goals, yeah.
You work for Goals, which is under MOAC. Well, you explain the relationship between MOAC, well, maybe I need to hear the explanation between MOAC and Learning Community, and now Goals. Yeah.
And if you would go ahead and talk a little bit about changes in the future and where you're at, maybe that you shared earlier too, since about attendance.
Oh, okay, all right, okay, okay, all right. So they're all three separate entities. There is an advisory board for goals that's made up of the superintendents that are, but MOAC is a separate entity also. It's an organization that really is brought together by UNO, University of Nebraska at Omaha. And then the Learning Community is a statutory agency. We're an educational subdivision like a school district or an ESU would be. So we're three separate entities, but through the purpose of collaboration, we're all trying to work together, and we all share common goals and common needs. You know, every entity is different, just like a school building within a large school district. Every school building has its own uniqueness, but at the end of the day, we're all trying to work towards common goals. So we are separate. With goals, I shared that we have been referring to goals as the superintendent's plan to improve attendance. 10 years ago, there was legislation that was fairly, what would be the right word? I don't know the right word to say, but the legislation that required school districts to send children to the courts for attendance purposes and what have you, that legislation changed years ago, but the need has not. And so just like we have the superintendent's plan for early childhood, we have the superintendent's plan to improve attendance, because we all know that that's a key piece. So sometimes I fall in and out of referring to it as goals or referring to the superintendent's plan to improve attendance, and that's just kind of a leftover from years back. But yeah, it's really just trying to improve attendance at the schools. By the legislation, the schools have an attendance team. So if student David is having issues getting to school, that school has an attendance team and what have you. And then if that isn't working, then the school district can refer the family to the Goals Center. The families choose to collaborate with Goals and cooperate, and then go through and find what are the barriers that's keeping from attendance there. Within the learning community, there was originally 18 things legislatively that we were responsible for. One of them is still there today, which is just to monitor attendance and to support attendance. So we help support goals through the attendance initiative.
So I'll go down here real quick to just to clarify the goals. The goals is a 501c3 separate entity that's a nonprofit that you're the executive director of,
Yes.
correct?
Yep.
And the work that you do programmatically is then funded by various sources, one in particular being the learning community. So I think that's just a piece in all the different pieces that are here to sometimes understand when attendance is
Yes.
what's in the plan. The use of the Goal Center to help address that is the vehicle in which you're
Yes.
getting to it as a part of the plan.
Yes.
See, I am getting it. It's taking a while, but I'm getting it.
Yes,
Pat?
but sometimes it takes us longer.
There's a lot of moving parts that we're all working
Yeah,
on. So
there
it
is. This is an early childhood question. Because of the size of the area that you're working with and the number of children that you have, you're going to have a real variety of childcare opportunities for families. How does that work when, I mean, are your outside entities like the private daycares, and how did you get them to get involved? And
So-
are they?
Well, there's a couple of ways that Kim, maybe if you want to step up, she could talk about what BECI does. For the learning community, our primary focus areas for us are in North and Southeast Omaha. And so we invite daycare providers, home care providers to participate in programs to learn quality childcare.
Okay.
And it's a voluntary piece, the step up to quality that takes
Sure.
place within the state of Nebraska. We are helping to try to get them to step 3, where then they can
Okay.
then receive support from the department. We're trying to fill that 0 to 3 gap, and we're very focused in that section of town
Okay.
with ours. But I know that within the superintendent's plan is the PD for all, and then I'm going to stop because we have the expert at the table for that.
Thank you very much. The superintendent's early childhood plan does have a variety of ways that child care providers can be involved in the work. One that David just alluded to is PD for All, Professional Development for All. We just had an institute yesterday that included more than 250 participants
Wow.
in a full day of learning. Those institutes, and it's a series that occurs over the course of the year, are free and open to anyone in the learning community. So a family child care home provider, a big center, a school district, and we have all of those participating. It's generally about half and half school-based folks and community-based providers. This year, the series is all about social emotional learning and executive function, and that came very clearly from the partners that we work with, and I think that large enrollment reflects the interest in that area of development. So that series happens. I would like to highlight as well a piece that has really grown over the last several years. In the early days of PD for All, we started having folks come and say, is there someone who can interpret today for me, because we're bilingual, or I'm only Spanish speaking and I really want this content but I can't access it. And so we started by having headphones with simultaneous translation. Then we moved to having breakout sessions that were provided in Spanish. And last year, I'm very proud to say, we are now offering full day institutes entirely in Spanish. And we had 90 people enrolled in the last one that we did in the summer. And that network of providers is really growing, and that's exclusively community-based. We're using some of our school bilingual staff as breakout session leaders. Another way that community-based providers are connected in the superintendent's plan is in the 10 full implementation schools, the schools as hub that Dave referred to. We have families that are involved in voluntary home visiting from birth to 3, and then children transition into high-quality preschool. That may be at the school site, but I'm sure you're all aware that there are not 3- and 4-year-old slots for every child in all of the districts. And some parents choose to enroll in community-based childcare, and that's a very valid. And others choose to keep their children at home. And all of those are supported in the school as hub concept. So we have a person called a family facilitator who continues to connect with the families, provide parenting support. We also host at the school what we call parent-child interaction groups. So those parents in home visiting come together to network with other families of infants and toddlers connected to the school. And so we support that transition no matter where the children come, to try to help with the move into kindergarten eventually. A final way that I'll highlight, and then I'll be quiet because I can talk a lot about this.
Well, no, I have another
A
question.
number of the communities have hosted community forums around early childhood. And we have come in from the Buffett Institute to facilitate those so that the school staff and the community providers are on an even playing field, talking about what's really going well in our community around early childhood, what are the challenges that our parents and young children are facing, and what might we do together collaboratively. And there have been some very nice things that have come out of that in terms of joint professional development, for example, or school staff going into community-based centers to support children and staff. And so those have been another way that we have tried to incorporate and provide benefit to community-based providers.
Well, listening to what you've been saying about early childhood, I can see where, other communities that aren't in the learning community need to be looking at this.
And they are.
Yeah,
And
they are.
And they are.
As Mr. Stevens does.
Particularly, I like the idea of this family facilitator piece, because our smaller communities don't have all of the opportunities for families, and it either ends up being an HHS or nothing, and that's something that we really struggle with in our smaller communities, is having that social worker or that family facilitator. And I like that word, family facilitator. That's not a threatening word at all. And
We call them, they're called facilitator, we call them liaisons and navigators.
Yeah.
So, yep.
There's
yeah, I
similar
like the
roles.
change in
Yep.
a verb. But I think, I know I'm gonna go home and talk to some of my early childhood.
Yeah.
Say, hey, look at this.
Go ahead, Rob.
Just to follow up on some of Pat's questioning. I read here, Community Achievement Plan, Section 1, increased access to early childhood programming, 1.1. Full implementation of birth through grade 3 approach. How close are you to accomplishing that, or what does full implementation actually mean?
Yeah, that is a kind of an outdated phrase now, but we have 10 demonstration schools in the learning community that are across 6 of the school districts that are implementing this full birth through grade 3 approach. Each of them have a full-time home visitor who provides in-home, following Rule 11 3 times a month, using an evidence-based curricula, parent education and support, as well as those parent-child interaction groups that I just mentioned. Each of those schools also has a family facilitator. That person picks up the parent-child interaction and parent education as children transition into 3- and 4-year-old, especially if they're not enrolled in preschool at the school, so they continue to work with the families. Then we support transition into the kindergarten, and we have a position that's called an education facilitator. That person is actually employed by the Buffett Institute, and they work with teachers in 2 of the schools as an instructional coach. They're working with them on age developmentally appropriate, rigorous instructional practices, whole child kinds of approaches, particularly social emotional development, play-based learning, as well as attention on early literacy and early mathematics would be the broadest focus. So those 10 schools are all demonstrating that approach. We're just having children who started as infants and toddlers get nearly to kindergarten age now.
What do you see as the sustainability of this?
Well, that, and that I think you'll see here as one of the next pieces that needs to be discussed. I would point to spread maybe as much as sustainability to Millard Public Schools as an example. They have repurposed some of the funding that they had been using for some other drop-in and play and early childhood programming to now create a birth to 5 home visitor family facilitator kind of position in each of their Title I schools in their district. They're doing that with their funding so that it is
with Title I funding?
Well, I'm not going to speak for Dr. Sutphin.
All right, that's
I think
fine.
it's a combination of funding, but Title I is certainly one of those that I think could be considered. And those are the conversations that we're having with districts.
If I may, just on that.
Sure, go ahead.
We do an intensive early childhood piece with the Omaha Public Schools out of our North Center, and they do utilize their Title I funding for that. So that would be, it's a little bit similar, but a little bit dissimilar as far as programming, but that would demonstrate some sustainability.
Yeah.
Is there any lobbying going on with the legislature that to see if more funding can come through TIOSA or whatever the case might be? Is that even in the cards? Is that just a dream of mine, or what? Because I really am concerned about. First of all, I think it's a great program. I'm really excited about this, but I'm concerned about sustainability. I don't know if the Buffett Early Childhood Institute goes on and on infinitum or not.
The funding that we use is learning community funding for this. It doesn't come from the university, from the institute.
There is going to be some discussion from the commission on that sustainability.
And I would refer politics back to Commissioner Bloomstead, but for our
That's a step down for next time.
I will say from my experience as I visit with state senators and others, there's a growing understanding of the need of early childhood, and even a growing appreciation of the family literacy piece of it and the 2-generational approach as well. So I would say there's a growing understanding.
So a couple of things just to pick onto that a little bit in this level of discussion. When the learning community came into play, Senator Harms at the time, who I believe was from Scotts Bluff, if memory serves me correctly, felt strongly that the learning community may potentially create a vision that is important to think about across the state. And so I think that's where our work on this plan and our work in understanding what's happening is critical as a part of the process. Because our role is also then to advocate for understanding what's working and determining what might that look like across the state in Nebraska. It's not just about money. If you really listen to what's happening, it's about the way the work has changed in a very different collaborative manner with a very different focus. And some of the change may not cost money. One of the pieces that I heard that I want to go back to is when you talk about that birth through third grade, we already allocate resources in K1, 2, and 3. It's about changing a paradigm in how our primary teachers are approaching their work. You know, so then it becomes important for us in our regulatory authority to ensure that we are putting expectations in teacher preparation, which, oh yeah, we hold some of the strings on that to ensure that teachers coming out have a level of training that fits into that model, so that there isn't necessarily a need for a coach to help retrain K1, 2, and 3 in this different trajectory. So there's a lot of elements that come into play that are part of what we have a responsibility for, the commissioner does, and then we help figure out how to make that happen.
And
So
I'll-
you were gonna have a comment?
Yeah, and I'll piggyback on that.
Yeah,
too.
I would love to.
Yeah. And
the
then
other-
Pat, I'll get back to you,
The
sorry.
other thing I would point to, and it piggybacks on something that Dr. Adler said, is the important role of the principal in all of this.
Absolutely.
The pride that I have when our principals stand up and say, not I'm an elementary principal, but I'm a birth through grade
Right.
6, or I'm
Oh,
a prenatal through grade 4 principal, and more of them
Yeah.
identify that way consistently. I've been doing pretty extensive work in the Panhandle with the ESU 13 districts and communities, and we've taken principals from these 10 sites to Scottsbluff and Sydney and Chadron to present. And what I've asked them to do is to talk about how has your life, how has your work changed, how is your school different? Not talking about any of those positions. What could principals in Bayard or in Banner County do? And they are very articulate about, it's about owning the children and the families from the very beginning. I can't continue to think about them as future Wildcats or future whoever. They're mine from the minute they're born. And those families now have a place. When there's a carnival at a school, when there's a reading night, when there's an activity, you'll see infant and toddler activities, not as an afterthought, but as the way they think about their school and community. That doesn't, and I'm a former principal and district administrator, and you tend to want to go right away to what's the reading intervention and the math intervention, and that's critical. The changes in the K2 and K3 instruction are critical. These relationships with family and community and children from the beginning, when the little 2-year-olds walk in school like they're the mayor of whatever elementary school because they've been there so much and they know, that's a whole different entry into our school system than the crying and the pulling away when you come to kindergarten for the first time because they've just been there and been a part of it. And I wouldn't want to underemphasize that, and I know David's programs are very much the same. Those relationships are critical.
And that's where I'll jump in, because it's still in our legislation that we are to be a proof of concept. And so a lot of what we are doing or providing funding for is for that very purpose, is to try to demonstrate, does this work and how does it work and what have you, which is why our evaluations are third-party independent evaluations. We don't evaluate ourselves. The evaluation that we'll be presenting to our board on the 21st, I'm just now getting a chance to look at it real quick, but I don't get to change it. So that's a key piece. And then Dr. Wise also mentioned the piece about engaging the instructors. So when you go to the sections of the centers, you'll see in the intensive early childhood, that PD for those early childhood teachers is very much a part of it. We have a neat story of one of our teachers who was 27 years in the profession, who will go around and speak, and I'll let her speak on her own, but say, this professional development changed what I was doing. I always thought I was doing it well, but now I realize how I could be doing it better. And so that is a key component of it. And finally, I'm really gonna piggyback on this. When I go out and speak now to aspiring principals and what have you, they do want to talk about the parents and the little ones that are going to be enrolled in their schools, because they do see them as theirs, and that is a big paradigm shift. We used to not think of it that way. They were future students, not our students now. So-
And we might add also the impact that these principals in these target schools are having on their peers within districts. We're seeing a cultural shift there as well.
Yeah.
One thing that I was really encouraged by was the conference that was held this summer in the amount of economic development and Chamber of Commerce people that attended that. I mean,
Thriving.
yeah.
Yes.
Because, and I'll use Red Cloud as an example, they needed something to keep their town together. And I think that's another funding source
Absolutely.
that we're going to find ways to blend money, if you will. I know you have to be careful about how you do that.
Braided,
But-
we call it braided.
Okay, well, that's a good word too. But I think we need to continue to discuss that.
Yes.
And because they're really coming around. There again is a change in paradigm that, well, if I'm going to keep my industry, I better do something about the people that are from 25 to 40.
Right.
And the ones that have,
Childcare,
yeah, the ones that have families. And so I think that's, and again, I said that the commission will come out with their recommendations after the first of the year. So, but it's nice that everybody's talking about the same thing.
Absolutely.
I think Lisa has one comment, then, oops, sorry, Patsy. Lisa, then Patsy, then quick summary, and then I think we're moving.
Do this for
Maybe.
Time to go.
Dr. Patton about the teaching portion of it. And I was able to visit in South Omaha where they had a room and a window and the coach was on the other
Yep,
side
yes.
and there was an earbud in the teacher
Yes.
and guiding them, even though I was looking at, that's a pretty good practice. But listening to the coach made it
Yep.
better. I wish that were in every teacher prep program.
Yeah.
Something like that.
That is our clinical teaching model, yes.
Yes.
We own that.
I was intrigued right away with your story about the teacher of 27 years and had to make a comment on that is, having been a teacher for many, many years, I know that you can sort of get stuck in the way you do things and it's not intentional that you're not doing better and better. But it is important for things like this to happen and things like that to happen to revitalize even teachers who are great teachers and have been teachers for a long time. And then the other thing I wanted to say, yeah, this is phenomenal. I just sit back in awe of everything that you've done. But the other thing I wanted to say was, it's the money thing is always difficult. But it's sort of interesting to me about how in Nebraska we can rearrange and change and get people to come along with this as long as we have a passion for it and we can get a body of people believing in it. So, boy, I think this is certainly worth that kind of work, and I applaud you for your work.
I say thank you on behalf of everybody that's here, that's doing it.
So, thank you, everyone. This is just 3.7.B of our committee. And in quick summary of just this item, and then we'll go back, and we can do the other items back in order for our committee. If you want to, that's fine. But real quick, just review all the materials, so when we come back in December, we're ready for, and if you have questions ahead of time, let
Yep.
Brian know. He can connect with who can help answer, because there's a lot of work that went into the materials that we have to review over the next 30 days. Thank you very,
Thank
very
you
much.
very
Thank you
much.
all
Thank
for
you.
your leadership.
So, John, do you want me to finish the two items? Okay, then we'll do, real quick, we'll do 3.7.A, which is an action item coming tomorrow, and that's to approve the waiver request from North Platte Public Schools to waive the requirements found in Rule 10, Section 007.04A, and you've got that information in front of you. And the request is for a 3-year waiver as it relates to the library media services provided at North Platte High School. And our committee discussed this morning, and we're ready as it moves forward tomorrow to support this action item. We also did discuss the importance and are recommending to the Teaching and Learning Committee to take a look at the issues around certification in areas, since we've now had 2 requests, 1 modification, and now this request of a waiver coming forward as a result of shortages in finding certificated library media specialists. So it's kind of a 2-prong approach. We will bring this forward as an action, but then also take a look at what are some things maybe we need to look at from a regulatory perspective if this is continuing to be a little bit of a concern. Commissioner, did you have anything to add on that particular item?
Just really quickly, as I shared with the committee, I don't like to do things by waiver, but we've identified this as an area where we can do some other regulatory work, and so I concur with what Rachel was outlining there.
All right, and then the other item, unless the committee had anything else to add on that, the other item, 3.7.c, we had an update from Perkins 5, and Katie Graham is here to provide an update for us as a whole. We felt it was important that she provide for all of you a little bit of the update that she provided for us today on where we are in the progress towards the state plan. Katie?
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's great to see everyone. We are nearing, heading towards the downhill of finishing our state planning process for Perkins. What you have in front of you is just a very brief summary of some of our activities that we've been carrying out in preparation for the plan. But if you switch over to the second page, I do want to just highlight our timeline. This has been updated just a bit since the last time I was with you all. You'll notice that we have a date. April 15th is when we have to have this submitted. You all, the state board, is actually the entity responsible for submitting the state plan. So I wanted to make sure we had plenty of time built in to actually review the plan, get more feedback on the actual plan, redraft the plan, consult with the governor, who's asked to be involved earlier than we had anticipated to make sure there was alignment with other workforce development efforts happening in the state. So as you can see, this month I'm chatting with you all, and we're going to be constantly editing and revising the plan. We're also going to be publishing our state-determined levels of performance for public comment. These are our accountability targets, where previously we negotiated every year. Now they are requesting that we propose 4 years of accountability targets and make sure that the public has an opportunity to reflect on those. We'll also be conducting some public hearings and continuing conversations with the governor. My goal, actually it's not a goal, it's stated, it's public, it's happening. By next month, this time, you all will have a draft of the full plan, which will include all the requirements from the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education at the federal level. Then we will just continue, I'm assuming, to collaborate, and I will keep coming probably every month until we submit to make sure we have your feedback that we can incorporate to make sure what we've written, which is very much in line with your strategic vision and direction and other priorities and initiatives of NDE, but also happy to continue to think bold and make sure that we are doing what's best for our students relative to career, technical, and adult education. So flipping back on the first page, just to share with you, in September, a pretty nice-sized group of staff from the agency went to Phoenix to participate in a state planning meeting that was facilitated by some of our national partners, Advanced CTE, the Association of Career and Technical Education, and the National Alliance for Partnerships and Equity. We included Lane Carr, Shirley Vargas, Lindy Foley with VR also attended with CTE staff to make sure we continue to think cross-agency. We did a lot of work. That was roll up the sleeves, sit in a room, and kind of hash out a lot of things. So that was a great opportunity to just collaborate and work. Last month, we have, throughout the whole plan and process, but especially last month, we've been continuing our stakeholder engagement and really making sure that it's meaningful engagement and not just the survey, which we're very proud of. As you can see, we had 1,230 responses, so we're very proud of our survey. But we, as you can see, hosted a couple high-level stakeholder meetings. This included community college presidents, Commissioner of Labor, a lot of ESU administrators were invited, and to make sure that we have collaboration across the state. The Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act, which is our plan in Nebraska for all things workforce development, the Department of Labor oversees that, is also going through a state planning process. So I've been heavily involved as a required partner of that plan in their planning process to make sure both plans align. Had meetings with the Workforce Development Board, Worker Training Board, Youth Homeless Demonstration Program, and one-on-one conversations with a lot of ESU administrators, superintendents, teachers, and anyone you can imagine would be interested in talking CTE. I will usually talk to them. This month, we are having some additional meetings with entities relative to systems-involved youth in corrections, not only in the agency but outside. And we are really excited about a new partnership with the Nebraska Indian Community College and Northeast Community College to form a Perkins Consortia. So continuing to work with them to figure out how that's going to work and be most effective. Right now, I know they're focusing a lot in the health sciences area, which is really exciting. Besides stakeholder communication and engagement, we are nearing completion of an alignment study, sort of outlining the state of alignment between secondary and post-secondary CTE programs. It's one of the big foundations to delivery of CTE is that the programs that students are in seamlessly transition to a post-secondary program without duplication. So really taking a deep dive, we've used some of those preliminary results, which you'll see in the draft, to make sure we're highlighting our strategic priorities relative to what the outcomes were of that assessment. We also were very fortunate that Ken Spellman, who was the former CTE director in Omaha who retired, wasn't tired of working yet. So he is now consulting with NDE specifically for career and technical education in Perkins. He has decades of experience. I know, Rachel, you've worked with him. He was a teacher, administrator for many, many years. So we're excited to have his expertise and knowledge. He's been a great thought partner. And as I'll chat about a little bit later, he's been instrumental in helping us drive the car as we're building it, since that's required. So a lot of the implementation pieces, which he's so great at, he's been helping with. He also helped, as I mentioned, we had over 1,200 responses to our stakeholder input survey, which we were very happy about. No big surprises in terms of the results. I shared preliminary results with the committee last summer, I guess, this summer. Everything that we could imagine in terms of alignment with our priorities here: dual credit, work-based learning, career development, starting earlier in middle school to make sure students have these opportunities, were all reflected in the results from the stakeholder feedback. So there are, I'm trying to think if there was anything that was shocking or way out there. I can't think of anything that really would change direction or anything we would need to comment on. There is an opportunity once the plan is final, once you all approve it, to go to public comment to allow another 30 days for folks across the state to respond specifically to what we've written in the plan. And then, yes, just a lot of writing. That's what's been happening. So as I mentioned, we're driving the car, bus as we're building it. So the state plan's due April 15th, but locals actually have to do a lot of things before they are ready to apply for funds next year. So we have to implement a lot of the provisions of the new law before we even have the final plan finished. The biggest thing that we've had to do, and it was the most fundamental change to the law, is the addition of something called the Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment, which is really making sure across 6 defined elements, every local district, which is different again, takes an in-depth look at their CTE system and what they are doing for all special and subpopulations and career development and implementing programs and recruiting and training teachers and all of these wonderful things, and then chart a course for action. This might sound really familiar because we've had a process like this in Nebraska for over a decade called revision. So for a lot of strategic reasons, brand awareness, success, and excitement around it, we are going to be referring to our Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment as revision. It's going to be the next evolution of revision, which has been needing an update and sort of a facelift for quite some time. A lot of folks have gone through it. Could be 6, 7, 8 years ago at this point. So this now will give everyone an opportunity to take an in-depth look at their CTE system and define action steps to help move it forward. We've also been working on a new application. I realize this has been a great learning experience for me. When you have a new state plan, you have to change everything. New application, new guidance documents, new everything. So we've been working on a new application that directly aligns with that new revision process. So priorities, obviously revision, we need to get that going now, and that's what Ken Spellman's going to be helping a lot with. It's broken up into a couple different parts. Locals do some on their own. Our staff will facilitate a regional meeting based on economic development region to help with that workforce alignment. Community colleges are a part of that. A lot of partners are going to help us carry that out. Big part of that is data and making sure that that's available. So the staff across the floor has been working to make sure the data are available in a digestible way to make sure locals are able to analyze as effectively as possible any disparities or gaps in performance across all the different special and subpopulations. Work-based learning, I'll give you a reminder, as a state, we had to select one of 3 program quality indicators that the law outlined for CTE programs. They were work-based learning, dual credit, CTE dual credit specifically, and earning a recognized post-secondary credential while in high school. Through a lot of engagement, loud and clear through our survey, work-based learning has been identified, at least recognized from our stakeholders, as well as a lot of information from the team as where we would like to see the indicator go. I believe the committee agreed to that when we met in the summer.
It just hasn't come to the full board.
It just hasn't come to the full board. So work-based learning, thinking that that's most likely going to be something that all of our districts are going to be taking a hard look at and thinking about implementation, we want to get ahead of that and make sure we're ready when the plan is implemented, that we have the supports in place for work-based learning. The same goes for how we define the size, scope, and quality of programs that would be sufficient to meet the needs of all students. All of these things are required in the law that we have to define, so you'll see them spelled out in the plan. So next steps, we've got our public hearings, our 60-day public comment on the performance indicators. We're really excited to hear what you hear from your town hall meetings, then we'd love to incorporate any of that feedback, and then have a draft for you by next month.
Wow. Patsy?
Just thinking back to the meeting this summer, and you did a fabulous job of summarizing all of this. There's just one thing that I was interested in knowing, and maybe I missed it when you said you were going lickety-split.
I go really fast. I can't
This
help
old
it.
brain, yeah. Anyway, so one of the things that I was concerned about as we discussed it was with the new lower age, 5th grade through 12th grade, and then dividing funding for that. Have you had any kickback about that? If so, what was it like? And if not, how did you decide to do it?
I'll be real honest, we probably haven't spoken very publicly about any decision that's come out about the split of funds. We've done more information gathering about the needs of both secondary, post-secondary, the different funding sources of post-secondary and secondary, looking at the law, thinking about what new provisions impact secondary versus post-secondary, but we haven't released anything publicly for comment.
And what I would say too, I've had some more casual conversations to kind of test the waters with folks around that. And I think there actually is both kind of support and understanding of that split. And actually a lot of buy-in to move to 5th grade too.
Yeah.
So I do think as we kind of begin releasing and having those conversations with folks more specifically, I think we'll actually find some pretty good support for that.
Is that something also that we might look for a little support in the town hall meetings?
I actually think it's a great point for
Yeah.
your
All right.
feedback
All
moments
right,
too.
thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Katie? Thank you so
Thank you
much,
so much.
Katie, appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And so for our committee, we will do a conference call before the next board meeting for the committee, predominantly to talk a little bit about Perkins and where we're at in that process, and update some things next month. And I think that's it, committee, unless there's, that's it, so I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Wise. Board will take a 5-minute break.
We are resuming our work session, and we are going to reconvene with the standing committee reports. Pat Tim, would you please report on the policy committee meeting?
The policy committee has 2 action items. The first one is to reaffirm State Board Policy P1, political activities and use of resources. Excuse me. The policy committee reviewed this policy, and the information in the policy is in Nebraska statutes as well as in the Nebraska Constitution, of which neither have changed since the last review. So the policy committee recommends the state board reaffirm this policy at the November business meeting. Our second one is to adopt the 2020 State Board of Education meeting schedule. The policy committee discussed the proposed dates for the state board in 2020. And I believe at the October meeting, that calendar was handed out and discussed a little bit. I wasn't here. And we recommend that the state board adopt the 2020 State Board of Education meeting schedule at tomorrow. And I think, as we talked in committee, it gives some real flexibility in the calendar this time. That's all I have.
Thank you, Pat. I will report on the legislative committee meeting, and I was a great chairperson this month, and we did not hold a meeting. Pat Tim, would you report on the Commissioners' Appraisal Committee meeting?
Well, we didn't hold a meeting either.
Okay. Lisa Fricke, you want to report on the AQuESTT Teaching and Learning Domain Committee? I know you have a report.
Very short.
Microphone.
Oh, yes. I am so sorry. The Teaching and Learning Domain Committee met to hear the recommendation from the NDE staff on the adoption of the social studies standards, content standards, and Corey and Harris are here today to kind of let us know and share information about that development and the final draft. So thank you for being here. Greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I was going to say something like save the best for last, or, usually I make a joke about how long we're going to be, but John's left, so that's kind of lost. So I think we'll just get right to business. So really excited to have a brief conversation today regarding the progress around the social studies standards. Just as a reminder, tomorrow this is an action item, so we will be asking for approval from this board for the 2019 standards. I wanted to start off with today is just a couple of reminders around the requirements that are identified in Nebraska statute. So Nebraska law requires the State Board of Education to adopt measurable academic content standards for the grades, at least for the grades required for statewide assessment within the areas of reading, writing, mathematics, science, and social studies. And sometimes we get asked, why are we looking at standards, revising them, or updating? For those specific content areas, that's a requirement of law, and those standards need to be revisited every 7 years. Along with that, the law requires districts for reading, writing, mathematics, science, and social studies to either adopt the state-approved content standards or adopt content standards deemed equal to or more rigorous than the state-approved standards. And I will say, over the course of my time at the agency, that when this board approves standards, we see districts adopting and utilizing those standards to guide instruction as well. But again, just wanted to be sure to call out the requirements that are in Nebraska law. I've used this slide before, but I think it's important to note that we do use a somewhat of a consistent process for all content area standards. For as long as I've been here, we've utilized Nebraska educators to write our standards, and we have a slide at the end that shows the power in that and how important that is. Utilizing pre-K through 16 expertise. In addition to our educators, we continue to utilize subject matter experts that serve as an advisory team. This would include our higher ed experts, our community-based organization experts, and we've really worked to even target specific subject matter experts. I'm thinking about the work that we've done to review the standards for bias. We also utilize national resources that are available. That includes other state standards. We continue to be intentional about integration of the Nebraska Career Readiness Standards into all content area standards. I hope that you believe that we've worked hard to maintain ongoing communication with this board and provide you input and opportunities for feedback. And then the last piece, which is something we continue to refine, is really consider and incorporate public input and feedback as appropriate. So as we move to talk a little bit about the draft that you see today, I might mention that the draft that's posted in Spark is essentially draft number 4. The previous drafts are housed on a social studies standards revision page. We've worked to be as transparent as possible so you can see the evolution of the standards, which is kind of exciting. The first draft was shared with you back in April. I'll also mention that in Spark is a comprehensive timeline that just serves as a reminder relative to the time when we provided updates to this board, as well as opportunities for public input. And then we also included a list of the writing team in Spark as well. I believe we shared that previously, but again, it's such an amazing group of educators that came together to write the standards. Wanted to make sure that that was shared again.
Just to kind of go over again the writing team charge, what directions did we give to the writing team as they began this process and throughout the past year? The first thing they did was review evaluations of the 2012 standards. This was done by 2 different studies that we had commissioned by the University of Nebraska at Omaha. That gave us a look at where we were in 2012 to begin the process. Much of those studies said that the 2012 standards had a lot of good things in them, and so a lot of that was kept. We incorporated provisions set forth by the state statute in Nebraska, which includes the 79-724, which we'll talk about more in a little bit, but also the multicultural education statute, the character education statute, and also this board's global competency statement and policy. We identified expectations for student learning in civics, economics, financial literacy, which is part of the economic standards, geography and history, and we developed standards that were, when mastered, allowed students to be successful in post-secondary coursework in social studies without need for remediation. We developed standards to help students become knowledgeable, reflective, and active members of the society, trying to make sure they are indeed civic ready, and considered and incorporate public feedback and input into the standards themselves. The standards team looked at all of the feedback that was given to us. Not every single piece of feedback was put in the standards. If they had, they wouldn't be 70 pages, they'd be 1,000 pages long. But definitely the team did look at every single piece of input that was given to us.
And I might mention, part of our charge too, and we've talked about this previously with the board, is really ensuring that the multiple perspectives are included in the standards. And that was something that was a result of not only the writing team, but public input and feedback as well. And we're excited to see how that's progressed. Last month, we talked about the difference between what we call the legacy standards, which will be the 2012 standards, versus the 2019 standards. And the slide that you see has a box around the last row in this table, because we wanted to spend a little bit more time talking about the provisions within the revised 79-724. You might recall that previously was known as the Americanism statute, and it was updated and signed into law by the governor this past summer. We do have and continue to get a significant amount of questions from districts as they're thinking about how they implement the requirements of the law. So we wanted to talk a little bit about what that looks like in relationship to the revised standards that you see in front of you today.
So some of the major points of 79-724. One is that school districts have to hold at least 2 public meetings each year. where they, at those meetings, examine the curriculum and make sure that it follows the K-12 social studies standards. They have to, in those meetings, approve the standards and make sure it incorporates the requirements of not only that law, but also the multicultural law, the character ed law. And they have to ensure that districts develop and utilize formative, interim, and summative assessments at the local level to make sure that these particular standards are measured. Continuing, there are 3 options that the law gives to school districts. The first one is that school districts can use all of the questions from the naturalization test. I will tell you that the federal naturalization test is under review, and we'll keep a close eye on that over the next year to see what changes are made with that. A second option they have, which they can do virtually, is have their students view a public meeting, such as this body or city council meeting or county meeting. Somewhere between 8th and 12th grade, with all of these, they are to look at fulfilling these 3 requirements and then provide some feedback to parents. The third option is that the students can create some sort of a paper or project about one of the people or events listed in the law. For instance, Martin Luther King is listed in the law, and so the events associated with Martin Luther King, of course, would be the civil rights movement.
So earlier when Harris mentioned including the provisions of law in the standards, what that might look like was looking at the 100 questions on the civics portion of the naturalization test and ensuring that that content is in the standards, and it is. Same thing with the persons or events commemorated by a holiday that are listed in the law too. Those are also in the standards. So we didn't want this to feel like something extra. We wanted to ensure if there's strong instruction in social studies education, the components would be in there. How it's taught, which we often talk about in here relative to the local decision and those instructional activities, is left to the local school district.
The law also states that schools are to talk about the sacrifices and ideals of patriotic men and women, inducing students to the fallacies of anti-democratic type of governments. An example of that from the standards would be like Nazi Germany and the Holocaust, or the Gulag Archipelago, if you're familiar with the communist years in the former Soviet Union. Understanding the rights and responsibilities of citizenship, and understanding both the U.S. Constitution and the Nebraska Constitution are in the standards. And it also learned the duties and value and practice of civil discourse. So the idea that students are able to engage civically and have discussions about issues. The law also includes that topics within civics and American history should be taught in both parochial schools and public schools, and that they are to apply their knowledge in civics, history, economics, financial literacy, and geography to address societal issues. And that each school board is charged, along with the superintendent, to be responsible for carrying these sort of actions out. Helping them to come up with resources and further facilitate that would be the next step after the standards are approved. I might also add again that the board, the writing team looked at the multicultural law, the character ed law, and the global policy statement of this board.
So to boil all that down, what does it mean relative to 79-724? I mentioned this earlier, and I'll say it again, is that the standards include the content-related events, persons, or topics within the law. Implications for curriculum, instruction, and assessment are still determined locally. However, they're supported by tools and resources from the NDE. So as we think about how they go about implementing one of those requirements, certainly our hope is to be able to build tools and resources that would support that implementation. the last piece, and I appreciated the conversation that we had in the committee this morning around the statement that the State Board of Education shall adopt and promulgate rules and regs to carry out the provisions. And I really do think that's an important point for us to consider and what that actually looks like moving forward. Currently, the rules that you have in front of you are the standards. So our focus was really to have a set of approved standards which support all of the information in that law, and then thinking what are the additional rules, or how within our current rules and regs can we ensure that clarity is provided. Because I think that's where we can really start to give districts guidance around some of the questions that we're getting answered, or excuse me, that we're getting asked. So I wanted to specifically call that out. So fingers crossed, tomorrow we have a set of standards that are approved by this board. We'll begin to think a little bit about what implementation looks like. We spend 1.5 years thinking about the standards development process, but really the heart of the work is when it begins being implemented in local school districts. You'll note that we moved the standards revision up 1 year. We weren't scheduled to start that process until 1 year. We started it 1 year earlier. And that was a part of a conversation relative to things that were happening in the legislature with 79-724 and additional conversations that we've had over the last couple of years with the Education Committee. So with that in mind, we wanted to stick to our original implementation schedule. So really giving districts this spring semester to start exploring the standards and thinking about what that means for local implementation. As we move to this next school year, 2021, working with districts as they explore, considering local adoption of standards, and then beginning initial implementation. And you can see additional pieces around implementation in there. We do have a framework that we build resources and tools to support not just initial implementation, but really being thoughtful about deep implementation in school districts. A few things we wanted to call out publicly as well. Again, not just focused on the standards themselves, but thinking about resources that are available or will be available to districts. Number one is this idea of instructional shifts. So we've called out instructional shifts for English language arts, mathematics, science, and now social studies. And I think that's really important because it helps guide what a classroom should look like as a result of revised standards. So really continuing to bridge the document of the standards to what instruction, and what should be changing instructionally. The other piece, and this is currently a resource that's available for the 2012 standards, is the standards instructional tool, which is developed and built by our educators, and again just provides supports, tools and resources relative to the standards, and again I think that's something that's been really popular with our educators. We'll continue to build resources in our Open Educational Resources Hub. So we've talked a little bit about OER previously. We have plans to provide a curation and vetting process for resources because we can actually align them to standards. One thing we talked more about in depth this morning too was this idea of sample instructional frameworks and really clarifying what that means. But we want to move in I would say, more proactive role around instructional supports, where again, not just thinking about standards, but what are those frameworks that really can be utilized by a local district as they build a local curriculum, and helping them see what a framework might be or what it might not be. And continuing our conversations around high quality instructional materials, and all of this, probably should have just wrapped that last square around all of these, but professional learning. That's really critical. I think Harris's dance card is pretty full. He's getting a lot of requests from not only ESUs but districts for the spring as we think about how we roll those out, and we're continuing to think about how we might engage a broader group of not only NDE staff but ESU staff as well as educators in the rollout of those. One thing I might say before I let Harris talk just a little bit about kind of some reflections from the writers is also uploaded in Spark are some support letters. I know many of you have received those. I just got another one earlier today, so we'll add to that, but there is one PDF in there. We tried to gather all the letters that you'd received and to make sure that they were all in one location that you can review.
Well, I'll let you read these reflections. I think to kind of summarize them or put them in context, when we began this process, a lot of teachers come to that first meeting with their own interests. I mean, they may be very, very interested in economics or civics or history or geography. And from the beginning, we tried to say, no, what we were going to go after was a team social studies, that we're going after a set of quality social studies instruction that's got to work for all of the different school districts in Nebraska. It's got to work for all of the kids, despite what their grade level is. We got to keep the focus on kids, and we got to work at this as a team. I knew it was finally starting to work because on one Zoom meeting at about 7 o'clock at night, one of the leaders and the team leaders, she broke into singing "We Are Family" and started dancing on the Zoom meeting. So I knew at that point we'd gotten to that point. And I think that's a really good point to make. I mean, this team is a statewide team, and it's there now to have this charge of helping us carry out these standards and move those into schools. And I can't begin to thank all of them enough for that. I also want to thank especially all the members of the leadership team. They have met with me probably close to 80 meetings now at night on Zoom. Not all of them attend every one of the meetings, but we get on there and get to know each other. And like any kind of group of social studies teachers, we don't all agree. We never will. We probably wouldn't become social studies teachers if we hadn't. But they have talked through many, many issues that they have confronted throughout this past year and tried to, again, craft the high-quality social studies standards that we present before you. Part of that leadership team, I'll call out a few people. One is Dr. Kevin Bauer from Nebraska Wesleyan. He and Dr. Joseph Waxelman have helped lead the history group. Dr. Randy Bertolis from Wayne. Jennifer Davidson from UNL, Shelley Stark from Takema Herman, Lori Brody from ESU4, Karen Graff from the Nebraska State Council for Social Studies, Jackie Kellison from Lincoln Public Schools, and Barry Thomas from Omaha Public Schools. I'd also like to thank again Dr. Wagner and Dr. Schaefer from UNL. They went out and did these studies for us for nothing. I sincerely hope again in 3 or 4 years we have a high-quality research study that goes out and provides us some insights into these new standards. I'd also like to thank my boss, Dr. Epler, even though he does kind of throw me under the bus sometimes when I'm on vacation. Yeah,
He saw that.
Yeah, I did. I watched it. Matter of fact, somebody told me about it even before I saw it. The commissioners and again, thank all the Nebraskans that provided input to us because we've gotten a great deal of input. And again, not all of that input was into the standards or they would be just huge, but I think they helped us craft a better set of standards that looks at multiple perspectives, and that wouldn't have happened. And last but not least, a sincere thank you to all of you, this board that sits before us today. You are all excellent role models of what it's like to be civically engaged and dedicated to the principle that all Nebraska students deserve a quality K-12 social studies education. I just want to thank you sincerely.
Wow. Thank you for all your hard work. So I need to ask if there are any questions from anybody. I have just a couple of questions. And maybe as we develop the rules, that will become clear. But when schools look at the standards and review them, who potentially will be doing the review? Is that once a year or twice a year where they have to look and make sure their curriculum matches the standards? Who would be doing that review?
Are you referring to the, underneath
statute,
statute? Yeah,
yeah.
so there's a committee that's expected underneath state statute for their boards to be able to do that, and I would suspect.
Okay.
Yeah, so the local boards would actually have the requirement that they would sit as the American Civics, I forget if committee.
The Committee on American Civics.
Instead of the Americanism Committee,
Yeah.
okay.
Mhm. Right.
I appreciate knowing that. And then, I know you guys have had your hands full. I definitely know that. But last month, you had mentioned you're still working on the civics definition, and hopefully these will pass tomorrow. How far down the road might that come into play?
I think that's a good question as we, I'm thinking back to the policy committee too, where we, I think that definition may have last rested almost, because we were taking a look at college, career, and civic readiness as one. So, and I know that is also a goal within the strategic plan, measures of progress. So I think, I guess I don't have a straight answer for you because, we haven't.
Well, you've been kind of busy. I just didn't know how far down the future, but thank you so much. So this will come before the board tomorrow for approval. So thank you. And so the committee recommends the adoption of the standards at the business meeting tomorrow. And the committee also discussed some future agenda items. And so those will come before the committee next month. So thank you again. That's
Okay.
it.
Moving on to 3.5. Patsy, would you please report on the AQuEST Student Success and Access Domain Committee?
Yes, I will. As soon as I find my microphone there. Okay, we didn't have any action items, but we had an illustrious guest speaker, Brian Halstead, who brought to us some new information for us to take a look at concerning Rule 19 and LB 115 enacted by the legislature in 2019, which changed the language in section 79-215, which previously said that the state board had no voice in the language of Rule 19. And this new change in it gave us a voice. So our commissioner is concerned about some of the language that's included and some updates that need to be made. And so Brian went through those changes, possible changes, with us, and asking us to contribute and to share ideas with him and ask questions, which we did. We decided we are a very inquisitive group. So he has some information for you, Commissioner, to take.
Can I
Yeah.
just add one thing for clarity on this? So Rule 19 dealing with the enrollment of students,
Enrollments,
right?
sorry.
And so where we run into circumstances around enrollment, I think there's an opportunity, given the changes in the law, for the board to provide a bit more clarity and for us to ensure that we're considering the types of issues that we do face on a pretty regular occasion. So we appreciate that extra look.
And that will be coming before you, as I understand it, down the road as they start working on it. And then I did want to take just a couple of seconds to talk about a letter that came to the equity, came to us about the equity lens and statement and policy, Pat, from a very small community, the Sikh community. And they wrote a very, very touching letter about how they felt as they looked at this equity lens and equity policy and statement, that they were included, and they wanted to thank us for that feeling that they had of being included. And then I don't think there was anything else that we need. I think I'm done. I think I'll quit. Okay. Bye.
I just want to add, Patsy, that one of the things that I hear a lot from administrators is so much confusion around the enrollment pieces of data that need to be submitted. So I'm pleased to hear that there'll be some clarification given, because they are out there, many of them, especially in rural areas, that are confused.
As we went through it with Brian, we were like just amazed at how confusing it was, how poorly, it explained things and how it could be misconstrued. And so I think it's long overdue, and I'm glad we have a voice in it, because I think we have a good understanding of what enrollment means, right? I know our staff will work hard on that.
Yeah, and just, I mean, if I may just add, remember, part of this also went to, we had identified this as an issue. We talked about it in legislative committee. We included it in our request to the legislature around, our technical bill or any of those things. So, I mean, it is how we have to be able to manage through those things, but we now have the authority to do some of that work, so that's what we want to do.
And I guess we thank the legislature for giving us that opportunity as well.
Thank you, Patsy. 3.6 is the Budget and Finance Committee meeting, and President Witzel was going to report out, and he let me know that there was no meeting this month. Moving on to 4.1.A. And thank you all for submitting your monthly report. Board member reports are linked in Spark, and I encourage you to review each member's report. Moving on to 4.2. Tomorrow we will vote on requests to approve attendance at meetings that took place in the past and were not previously approved. There are 5 members requesting meeting approvals, and those are Lisa, Patsy, myself, Rachel, and President Witzel. Moving on to 4.3 on the agenda. The requests for future meeting attendance travel from board members are linked in Spark meetings. Tomorrow we will approve the board request for meeting attendance. 4.4, the monthly board travel expense report is attached in Spark meetings for you to review. And with that, we are at number 5, the regularly scheduled meeting of the State Board of Education will reconvene at 9:00 a.m. tomorrow morning in this room. We are currently adjourned.